does the word love mean to you?
Wow. Ooh, love.
Love.
Love. Oh my goodness.
That means you love somebody.
I think love is... love is a way... Actually, I'm not really sure how to answer this question.
It's complicated. Love is a complicated thing.
Well, one of the definitions is that condition or state where the happiness of another is essential to one's own.
I think love is just a form of God.
Well, if you're talking family-wise, it means everything. But if you're talking like marriage, I mean, you can be single. I mean, that's kind of what I want to do.
Wow, that's deep.
Oh, you know, you're asking the wrong age group, because the first thing I want to do is say love means never having to say you're sorry.
Love means never having to say you're sorry. But I don't believe that at all, because I feel like you say you're sorry a lot.
Love to me is the greatest marketing campaign ever invented.
Love for me is being 100% vulnerable and all the way in, you know.
You can love yourself first. Because once you learn how to love yourself, you can love anything in this world.
Someone that loves you because you're you.
Love means accepting people the way they are.
It has to be a two-way street. It can't just be, you know, I'm accepting you, you gotta accept me too.
I think that it's being able to do something for somebody else that maybe you wouldn't normally do, or maybe you wouldn't want to do, but you do it anyway because it's something that they want to do. Even if you hate it so much, you just would do anything because you want to be with them.
Love is a powerful thing.
And it makes you do the things you never thought you could do. And I think it makes life worth living.
Everything else becomes nothing. Okay, all that matters is that the whole two hearts, you know, they expand to that infinity.
It means, in a funny way, freedom, because you're free to feel so many feelings so deeply.
Love to me is something you do on a day-to-day basis. And so you can hold affection and you can hold nostalgia, but I think love is active.
I always say I'd rather love someone than be in love with someone, because being in love with someone implies that you can fall out of it.
If you're really close to your family, I consider that love, right? So any other person, friend or family or love interest, if you see them as your family, then that's love.
Love means, to me, a big ol' kiss on your mouth, and you're not against it at all.
I'm married 55 years. Our job in life, the two of us, is to look after each other and see to it that we're our best selves, so to speak. So I try to help her be her best self, and she tries to help me, and to me, that's love. You know, I hope to do that as long as I can stay awake.
It's like something you can dance about, or something you can sing about, or something you can build a building about, but I don't know. I don't really feel like words suffice when it comes to that.
Love means... I don't know, it's pretty great. I guess you can't describe it.
Love means a lot to me. It means a lot. I love my family, my grandchildren, all that. It means a lot.
If you have a swelling of emotions watching that, you're not alone, and this means it's a great time for me to tell you to make a new friend. So what I'm going to have you do is turn to the people next to you. Maybe you came with someone, maybe you're meeting someone new, but turn to each other and ask the quintessential question of life. People have spent forever trying to figure out, what does love mean to you? And turn to the people next to you and just chat for a second about that. What does love mean to you? take a few more minutes with the ultimate question of the human experience. If you're online with us, you can drop that in the comments or chat with whoever you're watching with. What does love mean to you? This is a gnarly question, because when we ask what love is, the answers are, if we were able to take everyone in this room and make a video back to back, just like what we just watched, the answers would be as varied as the video is, even more so. This morning we've really, we've laughed, we've cried, we've been all over the map this morning emotionally. Jeannie was sharing, and I was like, that's it. That's the whole message for the morning. Everyone can go home. That's it. And so we've been all over. We feel all these things. We feel all these expressions of love in different ways. And we're in here this morning, and we're listening to this question of, what does love mean to you? And it's interesting because this is the season of the year. I love that Carlos said Hallmark season. I'm like, yes, absolutely. That was a real life Hallmark story on this stage right now. I do believe in magic and Santa. Amen. But this question of love, it's interesting because any movie you put on, any song you listen to, any gathering you go to this time of year, you're bound to hear a few things along the lines of, we just need more love in the world. This is the season of love. Love is all you need, right? And we say all these things, and it's interesting because we kind of all are on the same page with this, but also at the same time, we all sat in here and had 100 different answers to the question of, what is love? What does love mean to you? We saw it on the screen, 0 to 100 with different answers, and we saw it just chatting with the people next to us. Love has all of these different meanings and definitions, and it kind of puts us in a little bit of a predicament because we'll have all these answers for what love is, right? And then we sit around and we say, we just need more love in the world. Well, what does that mean? What actually is love then? We're in the last week of this series, this idea of being rich, living a rich life through the way that we give, the way that we serve, the way that we love. And this morning I want to propose an idea that love is something that we can be more than just something that we can have. It might be a little something like this. For one season and one season only, it was a special one-time event in my life, I was a volleyball coach. I am not qualified to be a volleyball coach, okay? Height alone does not make an athlete, all right? And so I played a little bit of volleyball. I enjoy volleyball. I watch volleyball, the whole 9 yards, but I really wasn't equipped to be a volleyball coach. I was at the bottom of a list that did not exist of potential candidates for this coaching job at this school, and it was the week before season. They said, we need somebody to stand in, and so I ended up jumping in. We did have a winning season, for the record. However, it was very clear to everyone involved that I was not a great fit long term. I was not invited back for a second season, all right? And what's interesting about this is I technically had what I needed to be a volleyball coach. I had enough technical ability. I had enough access to Google and YouTube. I had enough access to other volleyball coaches that I could, steal workouts and routines and practices and the whole bit. I had enough to be a volleyball coach, but I wasn't actually, in my identity, I wasn't a volleyball coach. At heart, that wasn't me. I was able to do something. I was able to act it out, and I was able to act it out pretty decently. But it wasn't really, truly me. And it wasn't really, truly me enough that the whole school was like, thanks for standing in. We actually found somebody for next year, right? It wasn't me enough that it was a fundamental part of who I was. I didn't go home at night and be like, man, how can I really destroy the other 8th grade teams? I would love to know how to, I didn't go home and dwell on it, right? It wasn't who I was in the core of my being. It was something that I was capable of. It was something I had. It really wasn't something that was core to who I was. And sometimes we approach love in this same way. We'll have love. It's kind of a switch we can turn on or off, or it's love. It's something that we have that's maybe dependent on how hungry we are in the moment. I'm just being honest, right? It's maybe dependent on whether or not we had a decent night of sleep. It's maybe dependent upon how much money is in our bank account. It's maybe dependent on all that. We can have love. We can have it. We can have it dependent on our circumstances. We can have it maybe dependent on the person or how much we like them or agree with them. But I want to propose this morning that there's a way to actually have love in our being, to have love as so much of who we are that it's not something we can turn on or off. It's not like a faucet that we have to switch on or off. It's part of who we are that just flows out of us naturally. We have 101 different definitions for what God is. And in the Christian ethic, there's one. And it's very simple, and yet so complex. 1 John says this: God is love. Love is God. In the Christian belief system, maybe you're here and you've been following Jesus for your whole entire life, or maybe you're here and you're exploring faith and Christianity, and this is the simple boiled down point of the Christian belief system, which is just that God is love. Love is not some enlightenment to be reached. Love is not some status to be attained. Love is not some tool to put in your toolkit and just pull it out when you need it. Love is an identity piece. Love is all of who you are. Love is the person of Jesus Christ himself. Love is not a thing, but love is a person. The scripture goes on, though. I want to read a passage that's I've heard it most commonly read at weddings. Some of you are like, oh, I know exactly. Raise your hand if you're like, I know exactly what she's going to put up there. It's most commonly read. It's this beautiful passage, and it makes for a beautiful reading at weddings. But if we look at it a little bit closer, and we start to do a little bit of math, hang with me if you don't like math. I was not a math kid in high school either. It's adding up to me being a loser. Okay, athletics are out, math is out. But hang with me for the math a little bit here. If God is love, and then we have this beautiful passage that explains what love is, then it means that God as love is these things. So it would read something like this: God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy. God is not boastful. God is not arrogant. God is not rude. God is not self-seeking. God is not irritable. I wonder how many of us in this room are like, man, I get on God's nerves a lot. And this says, no, that's not true. God's not irritable. God does not keep a record of wrongs. God finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. God bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. God never ends. This is the Christian ethic, that God is love, and love is all of these incredible things. And it kind of turns this passage on its head, because when we read it, when you hear it read at a wedding, or when you read it for yourself, you can easily sit there and go, well, all right, fine, I get the point. I have to be more patient. I have to be more kind. And you find yourself, ironically being irritated with, all right, fine, I'll stop keeping a record of wrongs. God, dang it. And this is what. It's not about a list of things to live up to. It's about a list of characteristics of the person of God. It's a description of a person that we're then invited to know. Our passage this morning is out of 1 John, and as I put it up here, hang with it, because it can be a little bit, he's all over the map a little bit, so we're going to unpack this together. 1 John, he says this: this is how we know that we love him. Him is referring to Jesus here. So this is how we know that we love Jesus: if we keep his commands. The one who says, I have come to know God, and yet doesn't keep his commands, is a liar, and the truth's not in him. John is speaking to people who would say, yes, I believe in Jesus, and I'm following Jesus with my life. So if that's you in the room today, this is who John is speaking to. He's saying, if you say, I know God, I have come to know God, but you're not keeping God's commands, then you're a liar, and the truth is not in you. He goes on, but whoever keeps God's word, truly in him the love of God is made complete. This is how we know we are in him. Okay, John lays out a litmus test. I crushed it in science. All right, litmus test. He puts this litmus test in here. He says, if you want to know that you're in God, if you want to know that you're doing the things that God wants you to do, if you want to know that you're following Jesus in the way that you're supposed to follow him, here it is, guys. The one who says he remains in God should walk just as Jesus walked. Should walk just as Jesus walked. John says, here's how you know that you're following Jesus, is if you look like Jesus. And how Jesus looks is like love. He's patient and kind. It doesn't envy and boast. It's not arrogant or irritable or proud or rude or self-seeking. These are the characteristics of God. And so if you want to know, am I doing this Christian thing right? Then you need to look at Jesus. And if you look like Jesus, then you're on your way. John goes on. He says, dear friends, I'm not writing you a new command. This is where it starts to get messy, so hang in there. Dear friends, I'm not writing you a new command, but an old command that you've heard from the beginning. The old command is the word you've heard. So he's saying this is nothing new. You guys know you're supposed to love each other. You're supposed to love one another. You're supposed to love God. I'm not saying anything new. You guys have heard this all before. And then he takes a left turn. Yet I am writing you a new command, What in the world, John? Like, what? I'm not writing you anything new. You know this, but this is new. He says this is true in him and in you because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. This is so interesting because John says, I'm not saying anything new. You guys know this. And then he pauses and he goes, no, this is new. Sometimes we love, but we're not really loving. Let me illustrate it. It might look something like this. Oh, it might sound something like this too. Tis the season for poker faces at Christmas events, right? This is a little bit of what John is saying. He's saying, they're playing Jingle Bells, but also in a much more real sense, they're not playing Jingle Bells, right? Like, they're trying, but this is not it. If I was this band teacher, then the next semester, we would be starting from scratch, right? We would be like, you know how to play the clarinet, but also you need to start learning how to play the clarinet, right? And this is what John is saying is, this isn't a new command, but it's a new command. You got to love one another. You got to walk as Jesus walked. John continues, and he says this, the one who says he's in the light, but hates his brother or sister, is in the darkness until now. The one who loves his brother or sister remains in the light, and there's no cause for stumbling in him. He's using some really simple analogies that just help us understand that love and hate can't coexist. This room, it would be impossible for this room to be light and dark at the same time. It's varying levels of light or it's dark. Those are the options. You can't walk into a room and be like, oh, how weird, it's half dark in here. And John is saying, just as light and dark can't coexist, you can't hate your brother and follow God. It's not how it works. You're either in the light or in the darkness. He goes on, he says, but the one who hates his brother or sister is in the darkness, walks in the darkness, and doesn't know where he's going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. And John is saying, if you're not able to walk in love, you might as well be stumbling around in the darkness, unsure of where you're going. But when you walk in love, you walk as Jesus walked. And when you walk as Jesus walked, things change. And the way that you walk as Jesus walked is to obey his commands. It's not a popular concept, the idea of obedience and obeying God's commands. It's so much easier to just go, well, I have Jesus as an elective over here, and he adds some benefit to my life, but I'm gonna do me as much as possible. And what John is saying is, no, that's actually not an option. What's true of love is that love transforms us. Love changes us. When I coached volleyball for that brief stint, I didn't take a care or passion for the sport home like you hear that great coaches do, right? I knew that just wasn't in the cards for me. When I started playing guitar, I was inseparable from that instrument. I was obsessed. Every song I heard, everyone that I talked to, I just straight up didn't talk to non-musicians for like a year. I was like, what do you play? Nothing? See ya. I was completely transformed by my love and passion for finding music in my life in new ways. I was obsessed with it. Everything I did revolved around, when can I get home to go and learn a new song? When can I practice somewhere? My fingers were like bleeding all the time. Those of you who have ever played a string instrument, you know your fingers are just raw all the time, and you're passionate because you're focused on this, and all of a sudden I was making sacrifices left and right because I was transformed in my desires. I was so passionate about something, I was willing to give up anything and everything that got in the way of it, to an unhealthy extent for an instrument I've since found center. But love transforms us. Love puts us in positions of making choices about what we really want and need in life. This love is wildly powerful. How many of you have ever heard the phrase peer pressure? You've heard peer pressure. How many of you maybe had somebody in your life growing up, a guardian or a parent or a grandparent that would warn you about peer pressure, right? Yeah, okay, so peer pressure was this thing. I was definitely warned about it growing up, and I started to realize over time that peer pressure isn't inherently bad. I started to realize that peer pressure is just power. Peer pressure is really, really powerful, but it depends on what you're being pressured into, right? There's good peer pressure, and then there's bad peer pressure. And this is something that maybe we think about as being common to adolescence or to the teenage years, but the truth is that it pans out all the way through our lives. Think about the people that you follow online. Think about the things that you listen to. Think about the podcasts or articles that you read and share. Think about the friends you have on Facebook or the conversations you get into on Nextdoor. Think about the people that you choose to spend your weekends with, or think about the folks that you're invited to their parties. We all have these circles around us that are the power of peer pressure. And we find ourselves leaning one way or another based on the people that are around us. And this is why I truly believe that we become like the people that we hang out with. We become like the people we hang out with. And to illustrate this, I'm going to have you turn to the folks around you again. And again, if you're online, drop it in the chat or speak with the people that you're watching with. And ask this question: who are the 5 most important people in your life? Here's a pro tip. If you're sitting next to someone who's one of the most important people, say their name first. All right? Just get that out of there. You, honey. All right? But who are the 5 most important people in your life? And share a little bit about them. So turn to the people next to you. Who are some of the most important people in your life? Take just another second to brag on the people you love the most. This is a little bit of an old adage, but I think it's really, really true. I think it's pretty true that we're the sum of the 5 people that we're closest to. We are the sum of the 5 people we're closest to. And I don't mean the person that shares your cubicle and that you have to spend 45 hours a week with. I don't mean that. I mean the people that we're closest to, the people that we share our hearts with, the people that know us, the people that we know. We're the sum of those people. And so if you want to know who you are, look around at the people that you care about and who care about you. And you can look and say, is this who I want to be? One of the most powerful ways, I say this a lot, especially to high schoolers, one of the most powerful ways to shape who you want to be is to surround yourself with people that you want to become. Let peer pressure do the heavy lifting for you. Hang out with people that you want to be like. Hang out with people whose faith you want to emulate. Hang out with people whose generosity you want to emulate. You might need to make some rearrangements in this. If you look at the 5 people you're closest with and go, ooh, I don't love becoming that person in 40 years. You may have to go, I need one or two stronger people to come into this rotation and really help me become all that God has made me to be. We're the sum of the 5 people we're closest to. And this is what John is saying in 1 John that's so interesting. He's saying, do you want to know how you're doing with Jesus? Check how you're loving. Are you walking as Jesus walked? And he's subtly giving us a difficult truth, which is he's just gently saying, if you're not showing love, if your life is not bringing forth love, kindness, gentleness, patience, a lack of irritability, a rejoicing with the truth, keeping no record of wrongs, if your love is not bringing this forward, then John's saying, I'm going to suggest to you, it means you're not actually spending time with Jesus. Because when you're spending time with Jesus, Jesus is going to rub off on you. When you're spending time around Jesus, you're going to look more like him because you become the people that you hang out with. But if you're never hanging out with Jesus, how are you supposed to look like him? John is giving this really kind of uncomfortable statement. He's sitting us down across the table and saying, hey, do you look like Jesus? Because if you don't, it's probably because you're not actually hanging out with him. We can talk about Jesus a lot without actually being near him. And John is challenging that and saying, you become who you hang out with. Are you hanging out with Jesus? Because if you are, you're going to look more like love as the years go on. And it brings us to this uncomfortable truth that John says, which is that you know you're following Jesus by obeying his commands. The thing is that love always costs something. And it's a little bit clinical to say that. It's a little bit, we can shy away from it. You don't hear a lot of stories about people on second dates rolling out a list of, all right, well, this is what I'm prepared to give up, and this is a non-negotiable, and so let's see what you're worth to me, buddy, right? Like, that's not usually how we approach love, because we're like, oh, it's this beautiful, mystical, I'm supposed to be happier, and yet love in every relationship always ends up costing something. Think about getting a job that you love and how that rearranges maybe just something as simple as your morning routine. Think about the early days, those of you who have had a new baby in your life. Think about the early weeks of how much that relationship turns your life upside down. It costs all these things. Think about the early days of a romantic relationship and how you have to renegotiate all of your friendships and all of that, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I make room in my life for this person? Or think about new friendships coming in, and all of a sudden you're like, I got to go out again. I just want to stay home tonight, right? Like every relationship ends up costing something. If you're moving to a new city or moving away from or close to family, every relationship with any meaningful love costs something. And John is saying it's the same with Jesus. The cost is that you have to obey his commands. And if you're in here this morning and you go, yeah, I have, Katie, I could tell you decades of stories about the cost of following Jesus' commands. Maybe you're in here this morning and you go, see, this is my hang up with spirituality, Katie, that's a high cost, and I don't know if I'm ready to pay it. Wherever you are on that spectrum, this is the truth that John is just pulling no punches, and he says, love costs something. You're right. If you want to put it another way, you could say there's a sort of transaction involved in love. In order to receive, you also have to give up something. And that's worth weighing. That's worth saying, is this really something that I'm going to pursue? Is this worth it to me? There's a transaction involved in love. If you don't believe me, I'm going to have you turn one more time to the folks around you and gently, kindly, this is not a roast fest, okay? Unless you make it one, that's your prerogative. What is one way those 5 closest people to you, those relationships have inconvenienced or changed your life? Go ahead and turn to the folks next to you. What's one way one of those top 5 relationships has inconvenienced or changed your life? If you want a fantastic holiday party icebreaker, don't use this question, use the previous one, right? Don't start with this. If you want a great holiday icebreaker, who are some of the most important people to you in your life? It tells a lot about a person, the people that are closest to them, and by extension, the things that we're willing to be inconvenienced or changed about us in order to have those people in our lives. And this is what John is saying. John is saying, if Jesus is really this good, if Jesus' love is really this profound, if that beautiful list of attributes of love's patience and kindness and love's lack of irritability, if that beautiful list is really, really worth having in your life, we're going to put up with some inconveniences and changes that come along with it. Like culturally today, it's so popular to talk about looking within yourself to find who you are, right? And there's an element to that that's good, but it can go to the extent that we aren't willing to change. We aren't willing to transform. We aren't willing to grow and let go of an old identity to claim a new one. And this is the Christian invitation, is that Jesus is so good that whatever you have to do to get rid of the lack of love out of your life, that's going to be so worth it because there's this beautiful love that enters in. This is what we celebrate in the Christmas season is Emmanuel, God with us, that God came down to our level, he entered our world, and he introduced us to love as it was meant to be. He introduced us to such a profound idea of love all packaged up in a God-man being. Not just an ethereal concept, not just something that we could hope for to attain or try to figure out on our own, but Jesus appeared and said, here's love, it's me. It looks like this. There's this story that I love out of the book in the Bible called Mark. It's a biography of Jesus, and in chapter 8, there's this story that I love, and it baffled me for years. It's this story about a blind man that was brought to Jesus, and people said, you should heal him. And Jesus was traveling and healing people, and he was displaying his power by his ability to heal and restore and bring life where there was death, all the way to the extent of raising people from the dead. It was remarkable, and obviously word was spreading about him, and so people would bring their sick people to him and say, can you heal this person? I want to see them healed. And so a bunch of people brought Jesus this blind man. And they said, Jesus, we want you to heal this blind man. And Jesus didn't say anything. He took the man by the hand and he led him outside the city, away from people. Which, number one, if you're that blind man, like imagine your heart beating, and imagine you can't see where you're going. You don't know this guy. You've only heard rumors. Half the rumors are that he's dangerous and crazy and possessed, and right? And so you're getting led outside the city. And once they get outside the city, Jesus does something which I would not recommend, which is that he spits on this man's face. He spits on his eyes. This is the story. I'm telling you the story, okay? He spits on this man's eyes. Imagine being the blind man, like no warning, right? And you're led outside the city, and then it's just your face is wet. That's disgusting. We would be fighting if that was me, right? And so he spits on this man's eyes, and then he says, can you see? And the man says, well, sort of. I see men, they're walking around kind of like trees. It's fuzzy, but I can kind of see. And so Jesus spits on him again. And he spits on him again, and he says, okay, how about now? And the man goes, yes, I can see. And Jesus sends him back home. And for years, I was like, this is the most bizarre story. Jesus is acting out of character. He's being so rude. This is so, I don't get this. Over time, I learned that in that day, it was a commonly held medical belief that a powerful person, extremely powerful person, usually reserved for like an emperor, okay, this kind of status, someone with the power of an emperor, it was believed that their saliva had healing properties for blindness. I'm just telling you what they believed 2,000 years ago. They believed some crazy things in medical science 2,000 years ago. And they said, this is a cure for blindness. If you can get spit on by an emperor, if you can get spit on by someone with power, real power, your blindness will be cured. Jesus is fascinating in this story because he is the all-knowing, all-powerful God. He knows full well that's a myth and ridiculous. He could have said to this man, all of your culture's beliefs are super dumb, and actually I have a better way to heal you. Instead, what does he do? He's kind. He's patient. He's not irritable. He's not boastful. He's not self-seeking. He doesn't stand there and go, well, if you knew the kind of power I had, or, well, if you were a little smarter. He meets this man exactly in a way this man can understand. He's so gentle. And he does it patiently. It's not for a lack of power that he spit multiple times. It was giving this man time to adjust to a transformed life, that in an instant he was going from not seeing anything to seeing everything. And Jesus patiently comes alongside and limits his own power to be able to walk with this man in love. And that's the picture of what love actually looks like. If you want to know what love looks like, if you want an exercise, take that passage from 1 Corinthians 13, make a list. Okay, love is patient, love is not irritable, love does not boast, and then read that list alongside the biographies of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you want a crazy Bible exercise, that will mess with your mind because you start seeing, oh my goodness, Jesus is all of these things personified, and when I see them together, I see a picture of love that's more powerful than anything that I've seen. And that's what John is saying in this passage is it's worth everything. To have access to that kind of love is worth everything. To have that be your being and not just your having. To have a love down in your nature that you don't flip on and off, that doesn't depend on whether you had lunch or not. To have a kind of love that's so powerful down in your core that you can meet people where they're at and speak to them in ways that they can understand. That kind of love is love that absolutely transforms us. So, how do you get to know Jesus? There's a few things. Number one is you read the stories about him. You open up and read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you've never done it before, I would recommend that you start in John or maybe Mark. Mark's my personal favorite. It reads like a movie script. It's so fast-paced. There's always something exciting happening next. Read the stories about Jesus. Get to know the stories. If you're trying to get to know someone, you ask for the stories about their life. It's natural. You get to know someone by getting to know their history, who they are, what they're about, what they're passionate about. These 4 biographies of Jesus, these short little biographies in Scripture, are a way to do just that. You read the stories about who Jesus is. Another way is through prayer. Jeannie shared her story with us this morning and said that when she was in her prayer time, when she made space, when the busyness had faded away and she was sitting and reflecting and saying, okay, Jesus, I'm here, I'm listening, that's when Jesus spoke to her and said, you got to go get these sweatpants. This is important. So you make space for your life and prayer. Another way is doing exactly what we're doing now, which is just to be in community. If you want to know how to follow Jesus, I do this all the time. It's like a wonderful life hack. You want to know how to follow Jesus? Put yourself in close proximity to people who know Jesus. Like ride their coattails. It works. Put yourself around people. Become the sum of the people who know Jesus. Put yourself around them. Get involved in a community in meaningful ways. There's many more ways that we can do this, and so I want to give us just a second to reflect on this question as we close, just personally. And I would encourage you, if you have a way to write it down, or if you want to open up the Notes app on your phone, it's powerful to just put a pen to paper or to type it out and to just actually articulate what's one way that you could get to know Jesus. And maybe for you, this is a reminder of something that you've known for a long time. Maybe you're exploring faith and you go, I could try this. I could get to know a little bit more about Jesus. I'm not going to make any commitments just yet, but I would be curious to know a little bit more about this kind of love. So we're going to take just a second for reflection and to sit with this question for yourself personally, and then I'm going to pray for us. So take just a second to yourself for this. Jesus, as we